Evening all. Welcome tonight to what we're calling the Dominance Dialogues. This evening we got Knothead from Knothead Nylon. You'd like to introduce yourself, Knothead?
Howdy, thanks for having me, Dustin.
Thanks for coming. Um, been familiar with you for a while and appreciate you offering some of your time and your experience.
Yeah, we've had some good conversations, and when you suggested this, it just seemed kind of like a natural extension of it. So happy to do it.
So we'll go ahead and just get started with the first question. How did you first get introduced to bondage?
Well, I guess point of clarification, as I mentioned even off air before we got started, I'm more of a bondage nut than I am a rope nut. So I've always kind of been into bondage, like literally from late teens, early 20s. Um, Handcuffs are sexy, silk ties, karate belts, duct tape, whatever you had. I thought it was hot. Um, I got exposed to some, um, I guess, fairly early. Got exposed to some work by Segura and other like classic shibari artists and photographers, and was just blown away with how cool it was. And actually started trying to learn that style, and realized I was really bad at it, and it was not. It did not work well for what I wanted to do with rope. So I'm kind of an, I guess, maybe old school bondage perv where bondage is for something, for tickling, for spanking, for sex, that kind of thing. Um, and I ended up eventually looking at work by people like Matt Williams, especially early on when he was with kink.com. Before it was kink.com, it was just called hogtied.com, and then they branched off into a bunch of sites. But Matt has a great way of just simplifying everything, boiling everything down to the fewest ropes you need, the simplest tie that will make that strict position that you want. Um, and I think that was maybe good grief 2003. And I've made modifications to my own little toolkit of stuff, but basically that's been it.
You definitely seem to have your style or train of thought, so to say.
Sure.
Would you say that
Well,
you
it's
mainly Oh, go ahead.
just finish your thought. I think you were going the same place.
I was gonna say, would you say that's been mainly Western influenced?
Well, yes and no. There's it's dangerous to generalize, and like I did a class and I was explaining my rope kit and talking about how all Japanese rope artists everywhere use ropes exactly 8 meters, and hands shot up. No, they don't. Some of us use 7 meters, some of us use 10 meters, some of us use 4 or 5 different lengths, and so it's dangerous to generalize. Um, just like any, and I don't want to call myself an artist, but just like anybody that does anything, whether you're a musician or a painter or photographer, you're influenced by everything you see. Um, so, like I said, I started with the shibari. I didn't even know the word shibari, but I used to belong to a website, golly, 25 years ago called like JapaneseRopeArt.com or something like that, or JapaneseBondage.com, something like that. Loved it. Saw a few videos, tried it, realized it was way too complicated for me, and I'm kind of a simplicity and commonality freak. And I think it's a Da Vinci quote that says simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And that's
Mm.
kind of explains what I'm doing with any bondage medium, whether it's rope or not. And um, I can show you all the knots I use. And I still think it's funny when people call them knots. People will message me and say, "Hey, how do I learn all those knots?" Like there's a book and you get the knots and you know everything. But I can show you every different knot or tie that I use, real money, in easily less than 10 minutes, probably 5 minutes. Um, but as we were talking about the 301 level and getting more advanced, it really becomes about creativity and execution. Just because you saw a guy, Ty Somerville Bolin, and you can tie a Somerville bowline doesn't mean you can do the same thing that that rigger can do with it or with that bottom. In fact, I'm real big on crediting people if I can remember where I heard something. And Matt Williams had a great writing about 10 years ago on FET that I'm sure has disappeared. But he had a great writing that was titled something like "Don't Be a Jurassic Park Rigger," and he was saying that just because you can see a single limb there and you can see a double limb there, or you can see this harness and you think you can tie that, doesn't mean you can do what I do. I have X years experience, or that girl is this communicative and super bendy and tough in that direction and loves it when it's difficult like this. So it's sort of the Jurassic Park of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And just because you can doesn't mean it's safe for you to do it. So, and that was good grief, that was 10 or 15 years ago. And that guy every year ties up 10 times the girls that you and I do put together in our lifetime, probably.
I appreciate you elaborating on not generalizing. I kind of led you there just based off of our previous conversation.
Sure.
Um,
But yeah,
well, one,
to I guess if you had to put me into a box, I would be that Western guy that ties with nylon and it's super, super simple. And that's kind of where I'm at.
well, I mean, if you're going to generalize your ties as simple, I think that the positions that you put in the the bottom is complex.
Yeah, I uh, absolutely the bondage doesn't have to be complicated to have a complicated scene or to make a complicated position. It can, I mean, if you even think about it like I said, I'm a bondage freak more than a rope freak. If you were going to go play with leather straps, it might not be a bunch of cool leather harnesses that were custom made for one position. It might just be a whole bunch of leather belts that you use to tie the bottom into a position for whatever really cool thing comes next. And the bondage that I like is kind of like that, where it's probably a bunch of cuffs. The biggest uh, the biggest tool I have that's often overlooked that I harp on like some kind of religious nut is an adjustable knot. And that, if you were going to generalize again, and I hate to, but if you were going to generalize, people say, oh, well, a good TK or a good hip thigh harness, it starts with X amount of tension and it maintains the tension throughout. And that's what a good rigger or rope artist does. And a lot of stuff I tie is very loose and comfortable, and they're just standing there with ropes hanging off of them like a puppet until I start to tighten up all the adjustables, and then it becomes that position. So in that case, maybe there is maybe that's a style difference. Maybe that's more of a Western thing, and some of that comes from shooting video or shooting photos where you don't stress the model until the light's right, and you want the maximum amount of tie in whatever complicated position it is. So um, if they can be comfortable with a few adjustable knots slid, then you tie everything. You say, okay, is everybody ready? And the light's right and everything's right. And the whatever the Hitachi's plugged in or the violet wand or the candles are lit or whatever it is we're doing. Now we tighten all the ropes. And in 10 seconds, she's at the final position instead of seaming my way to the final position for 40 minutes, which is something I've run into with pure shibari folks at photo shoots. Is I'll say, okay, what's the final position? Where's her head going to be at? I got to know how to light, and they'll start telling me the whole transition sequence they want to go through to get there. Well, I'm not after that. I'm after the last position, and the more time you give me there, the more either fun we can have, the better photograph I can get, those kind of things. So in that case, maybe there's a little philosophical difference on the ties and positions.
There. Once again, I greatly appreciate you elaborating. And this is
Sure.
exactly what I was hoping to get out of this conversation is that 301 level discussions. So that kind of leads us right into that next question. What are some things that someone should consider before diving into bondage or rope?
Um, let's see. I'm trying to find that in the there it is. Quit looking. Um, I get that question a lot. Like I'm sure I think Pootie might be listening. Like Pootie gets questions about will she sell her socks. The question I get almost most often is, "Hey man, how do I get started?" Or "Hey man, show me stuff," or tell me your knots. What are your knots?" Um, and especially nowadays, and I know we're going to get into the growth of things, but especially nowadays, um, it's a little more difficult post zombie apocalypse, but good grief, there's rope groups and munches and dungeons everywhere. And if you are gonna watch a couple of YouTube videos or you are gonna read anybody's book or article or a couple of slideshows or PDFs, um, and then go start, you think you're ready to do suspensions or predicaments, or that's dangerous as hell. And it's kind of like trying to learn karate from a book and then awarding yourself a black belt. And that just, oh my God, it gives me anxiety, as they say nowadays. Um, I would say get out. I mean, when you say, how would, you know, what should somebody consider? Um, I was terrified. I played and tied like this for easily 15 years before I ever went out to a public event. And I was cold and shaking and terrified as a 40-year-old dude. I was standing in the corner with my little rope bag, hoping no one would see me or talk to me. Uh, and then they grabbed me and made me tie in front of everybody. They handed me a naked girl that I'd never met, didn't know her name, and was just like, "Here, tie her up, follow along here, show us this." Um, it's intimidating. I know it is, but most places are real good about respecting your privacy and your anonymity. I know folks that wear a balaclava or a mask every single time they go out in public. Um, I was that nervous at first, and now I don't really care. Obviously, as people listening can tell, I'm not showing my face. I'm still in the closet like that. But I would say if you're interested in it, you gotta try and get out to a group. Um, and I just had this question come up uh, this week, a couple days ago, and I said, get out to find in-person instruction. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. There is no one true way. Learn safety and learn what they're willing to show you, but also go learn what you want and not just the pipeline. And by the pipeline, I mean you're used to this stuff. What's the only cool thing in bondage? Suspension, right? So maybe people come out and they actually they just want to tie their boyfriend to the bed, or they just want to tie their girl to the chair to make them watch this or do that. Not everybody wants to do transition suspension performance stuff. And um I came out afraid that I was going to get swept up in the pipeline, and you will learn this, and this is the one true way, and you're going to end up waltzing to music while you change from a TK to a Fudo lift. And I am maybe most proud that it didn't happen. And I still like the weird kinky shit I liked before, and I'm still not into suspension transition sequences just for performance. In fact, that's one of the fights I have every single time somebody asks me to present somewhere, and I'll do all kinds of demos and stand up and tell fart jokes and make fun of myself and let people get out of my rope and escape challenges and beat me, but I will not perform. I have no interest in it. I don't want to be out in front of people like that. Um, it's it's just not my cup of tea. I have friends that are great at it. JD's great at it, and as much as I don't enjoy performances, I love watching Dave and Clover perform, and I've probably shot them 15 times, and I just love it. It's their playtime. They don't plan anything. They go out and they're really truly that good that it's improv. But I see so much of it that is not that. That is choreographed to hit at a certain moment in the music and to pre-tie this and to swoon here. And it's not my cup of tea. So getting back to your question, safety first. Like everybody else, I started with a karate belt and a lark's head to the bedpost. Um, and as long as she doesn't pull that hard, her arm doesn't turn that blue, that's fine. That's fun. It's sexy. Everybody's had fuzzy handcuff level, but I would say, learn your basic learn your basic building blocks. I call them Legos. And like I'm a fan of the Somerville bowling because I'm a simplicity freak, and I can tie Somerville with jute, hemp, nylon, even speaker wire. We had a guy who used to come to classes that wanted to look like a kidnapper in his photos, so he always tied with telephone cord and speaker wire. Somerville works fine with that. So I'd say, get your building blocks and try not to lose the fun and creativity that you came in with. And obviously, safety, 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 and communication. When I do my little, you have to have a quick negotiation, whether it's a scene, whether it's a class demo, whether it's a model for a photo shoot. And I always talk about hot is good, bendy is good, tough is great, love those. But I will take communicative and predictable any day over all of those attributes. So if I can get someone, um, whether it's a play partner or a model for a photo shoot, um, they gotta communicate and they gotta be predictable. And if they're not, it's a pretty short session of whatever we're doing.
Um, it was interesting to hear you talk about using, I think you said speaker wire for
Yeah.
bondage. What's the most interesting or unusual thing bondage in the past?
Hmm. Um, I do love vet wrap. Electrical tape is amazing and surprises a lot of people. We do a class, Bodacious Minx and I do a class called Showing You Not the Ropes. And we hand everybody a little bag of goodies. And if there's a little bit of pre-planning, you can have a girl walk into the room and tie her up with her own clothes. Um, a soft bra, pantyhose, panties, the sash off a dress, any of those things. And all that can be real hot. As far as scary stuff, maybe for bondage, I did a tour of Australia about actually coming up on 10 years ago with Lou Rubens. And the Spencer's Gifts, and it's probably not their brand, but you know what I'm talking about, the Spencer's Gift level of silk love ropes or whatever that you find at like your I don't know what you call them, but they're absolute garbage. I think they're polyester. Um, they have that stuff on the spool in Australia in I think hardware stores or somewhere. And we had people showing up to a weekend seminar to suspend with that garbage. And so we suspended them over pads about 3 inches off the ground the whole weekend. We never let them get higher than that. We were terrified the stuff was going to break.
Something I've seen in the past, um, is people who've used, like, barbed wire or something as extreme as
Yeah.
that. Have you
Yeah.
ever used something like that?
Um, yes, but if we're talking about for photography, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do bondage and especially obviously suspension is what's so exotic when you do with barbed wire. A lot of that stuff is movie magic. So um, yes, you can suspend with barbed wire. I've done chain suspensions as well. I had somebody that loved bondage, but didn't share my love of rope and wanted to be bound and or suspended in cold hard metal chain. So that was cool and a different kind of challenge. But barbed wire, um, it's tough on everybody. If you're smart, you just and you have a good communicative bottom, you get them to tell you which barbs are hitting and you bend them under, and then it can be as comfortable as that sort of thing can be without actually puncturing anybody. But you can also take, um, if it's very easy to Google like Halloween fake barbed wire recipes and end up with some twine that to photographs looks very much like barbed wire and is very safe to use.
I appreciate you elaborating on that, and that kinda goes back to something you commented on earlier, how what you see, how you get there is dramatically different, making sure that that last position that the bottom is in is the toughest, or right before you're going to take the
Sure.
picture, put them in that.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's something that, like, social media kinda perpetuates, and I can be guilty of that. Um, and then more to also going I really appreciate how you made it clear that performance suspension and like the end all be all. There, that's not everybody's desire, and I would actually
Yeah,
say
sure. Um,
probably a small percentage of the community that actually desires it. I think more people probably desire, bondage. And to be honest, I've gotten so lost in performance suspension that sometimes I forget about how much I enjoy just
Absolutely. Yeah, it becomes a that's I'm kind of ADD, so I'm telling the story from the middle and then backwards and then several anecdotes like Pulp Fiction. But it's I was afraid that as I got more technical at it and did more of it that it would lose the sexy. And I think everybody fights against that. Everybody that gets seriously involved in more than the lifestyle, but out in the community and going to events and all that. If you're tying 4 or 5 times a week, or you're helping people tie, um, you should. I feel like you should have a healthy fear of losing the sexy. But there's so much. It feels like because you go to a play space, you go to an event, and you can't do certain things there. Um, the cool thing to do is suspension, and I know we're going to get into the art overlapping and how does it change, and it's all kind of interwoven. Um, Suspension is very visual. It's that you're making a beautiful sculpture, and it's a little more dramatic because she's off the ground or he's off the ground or whoever's off the ground. Um, it becomes like you said, you see these extreme. They might have had somebody step out for 1 second. They might have had the safety guys holding that bottom in midair and step out for 1 second and had to Photoshop the guy's arm out because he was reaching. But by God, it's a dramatic shot on social media, and you have people that think that's sustainable, whatever that was. Um, and then their first few times at the space, that center ring is always somebody doing a suspension, right? And if it's not, you're mad. I mean, I've been in the dungeon when somebody goes up on a Saturday night at 10 p.m. and hooks 2 flogging cuffs to the main winch and does a 1-hour flogging scene. And it seems like the biggest waste ever. They've taken the one suspension point in the dungeon for a flogging scene, and everybody's mad. Well, if you if you bring the folks in and they already knew suspension was cool and sexy and dramatic and photogenic, and then the center ring is always taken by that, well, most folks, or a lot of folks, anyway, maybe not everybody, but a lot of folks want to be under that center ring and want people looking at them, and that's its own kink. But it's that, how do you get there? If hot girls like Corvettes, you and I are going to rush out and save money and buy a Corvette, right? And if you're into girls and the hot girl wants to be suspended, you're going to learn some suspension. And you may not have had any interest in it, and it may not be sexy. And at the end of the day, um, it's an engineering problem. And like a lot of folks, I dove in head first. I went to when I first started going to classes, I went to a big suspension weekend and made sure everything I was doing was safe and um, structurally fortified with vitamins and iron. And I was dating a girl that had a suspension point in the house and had trees to suspend outside the house. And I would go to her place and we'd do it like a dozen suspensions a weekend. And it was not sexy. It was just purely an engineering exercise. I would think up different positions and where was I going to get the ropes, and it really just became about how do I get rope um, around her hips to lift in the direction I want to, because that's where most of the structure, in my opinion, and for comfort especially, that's where a lot of your structure comes from. Um, and after a while, it again, it's a Lou Rubens thing of get them up comfortable and then make it look like bondage. And it became this very simple, repetitive engineering problem of, okay, I can make that shape. How do I lift it? Okay, we did that, and I did a bunch of them for maybe year and a half, 2 years, and I don't have a lot of interest in them.
yeah, I feel very called out here, as far as, wanting to be in the center, and focusing on suspension to get there. It's weird.
Sure.
I've always been introverted. I never wanted to be in the center. Um, and I could tell you the exact day that the performance bug bit me. It was
Yeah.
at Trauma of 2014, and I seen performance suspension where he did an inversion, raised her about 12 foot in the air, and spun her around upside down by her a single column around her neck. And I was like,
Nice.
"Okay, I know where I'm going next." Um, but it's also funny how
Yeah.
you said it
And there
because
are some that,
I got go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna say there are performances like I mentioned Dave and Clover, Sam and Gigi in New York do some amazing stuff that will just curl your hair. Um, but I still don't want to be the guy tying and having everybody watch. I'm unusual in that respect. I just don't want it.
It's, not that long ago, there's a rigger out of Maryland. He was out here at the dojo, and he's asked me why I tied. And to be honest, I don't remember exactly what I told him, but he kind of said, "Oh, bullshit." He said the only reason people tie is for either ego or pussy. And
Right?
he's not far off. Um, he's not far off because there is definitely the validation just from sharing good pictures.
Sure. And if that's I'll add a third in there. Um, there are plenty of folks I know that were bottoms that wanted to become riggers because the rigger was getting the attention. And there are plenty of folks, like you said, it's either um, you're an exhibitionist or a performance-minded person where you like to be out there. Um, something I guess I can share this one. I was sort of fangirling on Lou Rubens when we first met, and I'd never been out to a dungeon. He was like the second person I ever met, and a normal, good-looking dude, crazy skills, just a lot of creativity, um, and everybody was after him. And he said, this kind of rolls back to what you're talking about under the center ring. He said, there are some hot girls in this lifestyle that are into the same things you are. And I said, that's cool. And he says, do you want to date those girls? And I said, yeah. He said, you better figure out something to do under that main ring because that's where they want to be.
Yeah.
And so I have other things I do, and it's mostly a clown show of either predicaments or something ridiculous. But he wasn't kidding. A lot of folks, top or bottom, have a strong exhibitionist streak, or in a way, they want that validation, like you said, and they want to be under that main ring. And more often than not, the main ring is suspension. So I don't hate on it. It's just not my cup of tea.
I think another draw, since I'm so active in social media, is that one of my sayings is attention is currency. And when you can
Sure,
post someone in social media or they can post themselves and feel beautiful and feel validated, right? So you don't even need
absolutely.
to be under the ring under at that point, but that goes back into like one of the reasons why a lot of us tie is ego, which not necessarily a bad thing, but I do part of it.
Well, I didn't I didn't make the I ADD'd and I didn't make the second part of that point was in addition to, like you said, it's either ego or pussy, I think was the answers that the guy said. Um, Lunatic Bound is a guy that I used to tie with a lot. We were at the same dungeon. Very creative cat, real good at what he does. And we used to problem solve and stuff together. And he would do classes. And as part of one of his classes, I forget, I think it was one of his rope torture classes, like a Simenawa class or something, or a classic four tortures or something. And he would say, yeah, you hear these questions all the time. Why do you do this? I do this because it makes my dick hard. And I'm like, well, that's putting it right on Front Street. Um, if the guy doing the spanking, if we take rope out of it and bondage out of it and we go to a different kink, the guy doing the spanking, if he is just servicing her need to be spanked, maybe he's just doing it for the pussy, as you would say. But if he actually gets off on it, if he enjoys the power, if he enjoys the whatever it is going on in his head, that's a separate that's separate from getting the girl. That's he found a girl that'll let him do what he wants. And there's I think if you're doing it right, it's both sides of that.
I would agree that that actually made me think of a quote I just heard today um by Chris Williamson, and it says it's one thing to get what you want, another thing to want what is worth getting.
Absolutely. I heard as a follow to that, I heard something and it's not at all kink related, but it's very related to that quote. And it said something like you have already achieved goals that you told yourself would make you happy.
I just
Right?
posted that quote. That's Jordan Peterson.
There you go. And it's the suspension was one of those because I'm sure you've seen the same thing in your rope groups or at the dojo. You'll get somebody new come in and they'll have a girl that or they'll have their bottom. It doesn't have to be a girl. I say girl because that's how I play, but to each their own. Um, they'll come into the dojo. They have a starry-eyed partner that thinks they're going to learn the magic word, and they'll say, "Show me the suspension." Like there's one, and it's a light switch you turn on, and they're done learning. And I have seen people come in and learn enough to do whatever, a gravity boot, something to get their bottom off the ground 6 inches and never come back because that was the one thing that was their mission was get them off the ground by 1 inch and I get laid. Um, yeah, that the suspension was one of those things that once I went to a class or classes and started doing them, it was kind of anticlimactic. If it does something, and you can see in the pictures that we're talking about later, if the if I'm using gravity and the suspension does something or the partial does something to make the predicament work or make her super exposed and that's what she gets off on or makes a dramatic photo, great. But if I can do the same thing on the ground or in the bedroom or up against a tree, I'm happy with that too.
That's one of my big attractions to rope or bondage in general is the diversity.
Absolutely.
So I
And
think
that's go ahead.
I was gonna say I think we pretty much covered the third question in
Okay.
ways. So we'll go ahead and skip that one, and we'll go ahead into the fourth question that I proposed, and that is, what are the emotional and psychological aspects of being restrained or restraining someone else?
Mm. Well, I do want to pop back to number three after this, but I think it's all kind of wrapped up in it. Um, there's a lot of responsibility on both sides, and not. It's kind of the reverse, or at least my take on it is that it's kind of the reverse of what you think. Um, there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of trust, obviously, letting somebody tie you up. And I don't mean a sloppy TK and nylon that's going to fall off if you don't hold your arms just a certain way, which I've seen a lot. But to actually tie somebody up where they can't get away without your help, or they can't get comfortable again without your help. There's a lot of trust going both directions. And the one that I think is really overlooked in our crazy world we live in right now is to be the rigor of somebody you don't know really well is fucking terrifying.
Mhm.
And I avoid it like the plague. Um, just because I've been on whatever FET, for instance, for a long time, I have a fair amount of uh, interaction with the public or followers or whatever numbers you want to talk about. And I don't have huge numbers because the OnlyFans girls kill me, but I still get lots of random reach out. Hey, want to tie me up? Hey, want to tie my girlfriend up? Hey, if you're at this event, we can tie. And I know guys that are real good at that at the pickup play, and it has always terrified me. I stay away from it as best I can. And I am amazed how many bottoms are willing to just, hey, high five, let's go tie me up. And they go at it that fast. And um, I mean, to talk about the emotional and psychological, um, yeah, I mean, if you have some, big
cathartic scene, whatever near-death experience or however extreme, let somebody mess around with your triggers, or you have intentional fears or things that knock you off center, um, and you play with that stuff intentionally, you can touch on all responsibility.
And it kind of goes back and forth. And again, with me being primarily a top, I see the trying to trust somebody enough to communicate with me that yes, they do want it tighter, or it's okay that it hurts. It's supposed to. That's a scary area. I don't wade in. I don't wade into that pond or into that ocean. I don't wade into that ocean lightly.
Sure. I think you covered that question very well, and I think um, we'll circle back to the third question, um, and that
Yeah,
was what. I'm trying to pull my exact question. Just some
I got it.
advice that
What
you.
would I talk to the veterans of the community? Now, by veterans, do we mean folks that have been around a long time or folks of a certain skill? Because I know folks that have gotten real good real quick, and I know other folks that have been in the community for maybe 30 years and can't tie their shoes.
Fair. That makes me think. Sometimes people with 20 years experience have 20 years of doing the same year. So let's
Yeah, yeah.
speak on the skill level, not necessarily the duration inside of
Sure.
the
And
community.
that's an easy one to draw a couple of little things from. Um, Used to be, it took a real long time to get into all this, and this is before my time, so I'm not acting like I'm an old timer that marched uphill both ways to school. But the guys before me, the Lou Rubens, the Matt Williams, the Jay Edwards, PD, um, the guys back in the say 80s, 90s, early O's that were really, and guys is androgynous to me. Please don't anybody try to be offended. I'll get to you and offend you directly. Um, but back in the day, people really, it seems like, had to grind for maybe 10 years to get a respectable skill level to where they would be a presenter, to where they would be a performer, to where they'd be somebody that you could point across the room and say, Master Domly Dom Lord X is very safe and capable. Let's let him show some people this, or let's let him tie up this new person. Which leads me to the flip side of that, which is kind of scary. Um, so you have these presenter level riggers, um, and then you have brand new folks that are the new shiny toy. And whether it's the blonde California influencer with six pack abs that can't wait to tell you about his whatever his oiled up posing videos, or whether it's the cute little cheerleader that just discovered she's kinky or wants to show off in front of this group of people, you have these young, relatively inexperienced, let's call them early 20 somethings, that more often than not, you see them go from zero to presenting or zero to being a performance bottom in a matter of months. Um, and it's a ride, it's an endorphin ride. I think it's the ultimate in drop that people get. You see a lot of sharpshooting, you see a lot of jealousy and anger. Um, but jumping back to the meat of the question, um, there's a responsibility to the veterans of the community, even if it's just skill level based. If you're that rigger that's been tied for 3 years and you're the next Kanoko, um, you still have responsibility to go slow. And I know that's a new shiny toy, the guy with the abs that, that has posing videos that you've seen, and now you get a chance to tie him up, or the great little bendy cheerleader that can put her legs behind her head and you can't wait to tie her up, and she's been in the dungeon twice and they introduced you to you because you're the big deal. Um, it's hard to slow down and say no sometimes, and I think that's an important skill. Um, and it's very easy to push a new person into maybe not some physically dangerous realms, but some emotional and psychological rise that they might not be ready for. And we used to, again, I used to talk to guys like Lou and other experienced producers that basically it wasn't really a scene at a play party. Uh, it was, hi, how are you? Sign a model release. Let's go. And it was 100 miles an hour. Whether it was kink.com uh, or smaller producers, they would hire these girls that often were not bondage people. Gorgeous little brand new porn star. In some cases, like Casey Calvert, she was discovered and shooting for kink.com within a month. Didn't have a lot of experience, doesn't know what the endorphin ride is going to be like, doesn't know what good pain over bad pain is. Um, and it's real hard because they're a lot of times they're real go go go, and they're saying the right things, and you have the skills. It's hard to turn that down. And then the reverse of that is it's hard not to be a sharpshooter after the fact, and you see that a lot too. Of you and I are in the dungeon, and you got to go tie the new shiny toy, and I didn't. I'm going to say how dangerous you are and how you suck. And I see that a lot, and we have enough drama in this community as it is without everybody sharpshooting each other.
That's a whole nother topic when we think about like the cancel culture that has
Yeah,
perpetuated inside of our community. And I think that boils goes back to like that the ego discussion, right? Everybody wants to be in the center of the room, but only one person
sure.
can be there. But I
Yep,
don't think that's actually the case. I think there's enough space for all of us that we all can share that
absolutely.
limelight, right?
Sure. And it's yeah, it's earlier when we were talking about new folks and trust and responsibility and emotions and psychological and all that. Um that's one of those where the responsibility that that bottom has to try and be uh not rush to the head of the line, be a little more even keeled about it. Um I've been a top and called a scene before. I've called a scene as a photographer before. I've called a scene as um, just as an observer at a kinky house party, and um, it got to the point that I thought guy's tailbone was going to break. Um, but it's it's the after the fact. It's the couple of days later. It's somebody sharpshooting, like you said. You got to type the shiny new toy. Couple days later, she's dropping. And I wander up and I say, "Man, that was fucked up. I would never do shit like that with a new person. That was dangerous. I'm like, you're lucky you survived. That's not cool. You should do a writing." And then here we are. Like you said, it's that angry cancel culture we're into now. Everybody's looking to take somebody down.
Well, I think um this goes back to a lot of what you were saying is that a lot of people get into this frenzy. You
Yeah.
see, I mean, I can
Frenzy's a
even
real thing.
admit myself, after seeing that first performance suspension, I definitely got in a frenzy and I want to learn
Sure.
how to do this type of suspension. Um, and I had to kind of check myself that yes, I want to do it, but I don't have the experience or skill to
Absolutely.
necessarily do it. While I already did suspension at that point, once I started looking at more dynamic or circus type of
Yeah.
suspension, I
How are they
realized
moving
that,
from here to here? What's their transition series? Yeah.
well, none of my rope that I knew to that point was good enough for that. It was good enough for,
Sure.
a static suspension, but once we start getting dynamic, everything changes. Um
Sure.
And that makes me go I love quotes, I think you kinda know that about me, Eric. And it made me earlier when your, um, tangents, for lack of better terminology, reminded me of a quote called, "Trajectory is more important than position."
Hmm.
And that goes back into that, like, that steady growth.
Sure. And I think you talk about frenzy. I think a lot of rope people in particular, and maybe kink people in general, we tend towards OCD, and especially if you've been bottling this up your whole life and now you suddenly have an outlet. I mean, you're young enough you don't remember. I remember when the interweb started and kinky shit was the first stuff I looked up because all of a sudden I would hope, find actual information. So when I went when I went to my first public event, I hated I went to a munch and I didn't like it and I didn't go back for a dozen years. But when I finally got talked into going out to the local play space, I went at least once a weekend for 14 weeks, sometimes 3 or 4 nights in a row. Um, and that was my version of frenzy. And I didn't tie everybody up or screw everybody or play everybody, but I was an absolute sponge for knowledge. I was like aggressively voracious in wanting more knowledge. And as much as anything, some of the knowledge was just finding out what I was doing was okay. But I needed a sort of I hate to say validation, but I needed confirmation that, yeah, the way you tie that is fine. Or yeah, when she says this, that means this. Or when somebody says that, do this or go see that. But when folks, especially bottoms, I think, come into the public side of things, I've seen them enter the lifestyle at 40 or 50 years old. And frenzy is not just a young person's thing. It's not the 19-year-old cheerleader only. Uh, I knew a guy that entered the lifestyle at 50 and went into absolute frenzy. He was sort of bi, open to everything, switch that just wanted to do all the things all the time. And he might do 4 scenes in a night every night at the dungeon because he'd waited his whole life for this, and now finally he had an opportunity, and there were no breaks. It was all gas all the time, and that's obviously that doesn't usually end well. Somebody gets hurt.
Mm. It's kind of worth diving a little bit more into frenzy. One of the comments on the live is that it's like a hyperfixation, and I would
Sure,
agree. It's
absolutely.
almost like impulsive or even addictive.
Hmm.
And something last week I brought up, and hopefully next, well, not hopefully next month, I'm bringing on an actual neuroscientist to dive more into some of what is happening in our brain.
Our dopamine addiction.
That's what I was just getting at. And, in our modern culture, we are kind of overloaded with dopamine all around us. And then
Sure.
once we first get exposed to kink, it's like, oh my God, here's this whole chasm of dopamine that I haven't even found. And it's not easily
Yeah.
found on social media or Netflix, or it wasn't, right? And
Yeah.
I think that promotes that frenzy or that impulsive or hyperfixation or fixating behavior.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are agreeing that dopamine definitely comes into play when with frenzy. And another thing that's interesting that I think is the neurodivergence that we see inside of the kink community. And I think that also plays into some of the frenzy that we see as well.
Yeah, very possibly. And there's I mean you can watch a new person put their rope away after class and know that they're just super hyper fixated and where they've got a string crossed in the way they whip the ends of the rope and they got to tear it off and start over. So it's I just and we've all been there. Um, but it's one of those things. It's like your parents. They tell you, hey, learn from my mistakes or learn from my experience, and nobody wants to. But who knows? Maybe in our post-apocalyptic world now, where there's very, very or what's the word I'm looking for? Less, fewer events. that it's, hopefully it'll slow down a little bit and there'll be a better quality of event. Um, I mean, it the in the couple years leading up to the zombie apocalypse, there were more than 1 major rope event a month. And I specifically started to cut back and, do other things, and my business started growing and stuff. But in 2018, for instance, I did 8 major events in 7 months plus my own intensives. So I was in the car, on a plane about every 10 days to 2 weeks. Um, and it like you talk about losing the sexy, that's what you turn it into a grind.
I think there's some line when it goes from passion to profession,
Sure.
and whenever you get it to that professional level, you lose a little bit of the passion. And that's something where when it comes to rope and doing the photography, this has always been a passion. I have
Mhm.
found where I've slipped a little bit into that professional side, which is good as long as it aligns with my passion, but I don't wanna lose the passion, so I've had to step back a little bit when it comes to, "Hey, not every time I pull out rope, I need to grab my camera." That's not
Yeah.
the
Yeah, I'm
only
bad
reason
about
I do
that.
rope.
Yep. Yep. You're absolutely right. And, um I can remember the very first few times I got to tie up a girlfriend now 30 years ago, and how excited and whatever passionate, because you just used that word, I was. Whereas folks that I have tied for demo or photo recently have described the experience as being tied by my brother, the doctor. Like it's completely non-sexual, it's completely dispassionate. I am making shapes for a photograph. And like you said, it has gotten to the point that it's very professional, or I try to remain, 100% professional. And but it is not playtime. And I still have folks that hit me up with a message that they think every single girl in every single photo I'm playing with, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, I agree. Goes back to, like, just the simple of what you see in the pictures is not always what the reality is, right? So
Absolutely, 100%.
and that's, I do, you know, paid photo shoots and paid sessions, and something that I have to be aware of is that I wanna maintain a high level of professionalism, but at the same time still offer that genuine rope experience, right?
Sure. And
And
that
that
there
definitely.
again is a difference from one rigger to the next, one top to the next. And that might be a good way to delineate too. If you're a rigger, maybe you're doing what I'm doing and you're just literally creating a pose. Whereas if you're a top, you are topping for a scene.
I think, this kinda segues us right into the next question. That would be,
Sure.
how do you see the intersection of art and bondage?
Um, Good question. Good grief, you go for an hour on that one. Um, I think it a lot of it sort of circles around even the suspension stuff we were talking about earlier. Um, Bondage of our kinks, bondage, especially rope bondage and double specially, suspension is very visual and translates very well to a visual medium. And websites and videos and social media are visual primarily. I mean, there's cute little sounds, but um, when I first got on FET, 2008, or call it 2000 or 98, 99, when I first saw Segura's work, uh, the photographs of bondage were just mesmerizing. And flogging may feel cool, or needle play or wax or electricity may feel cool or be a cool scene, but it doesn't translate nearly as well to a visual medium as rope bondage specifically does. Um, and a lot of that It just seems to keep growing, and I feel like it had a lot to do with the growth of kink and the popularity of fet over the past now 16 years. And how's it grown and changed? Um, we talked about it a little bit, and I think the style of things has changed. Again, going back maybe, I don't know, 2015, 16. Um, if at the end of the day, you end up with, if you're going to be a specialist, there's always going to be a specialist that's amazing at the thing. So, like we talk about suspension or we talk about bondage, the circus arts started to kind of creep in like 15, 16. There was a lot of lyre hoop and partners acro shibari and things like that. And if you want to do that, that's cool, but go get Cirque du Soleil or the Chinese National Circus, and they will blow us out of the water. So I feel like that stuff had its moment, and people kind of moved on back to more bondage and more sexy, sensual kind of than just the performance flipping somebody around.
I I agree, like, when it comes to thinking about, like, Circus Orlais and what we see there versus what we see in the rope world, um, but I think that's where we start to see the bridge in the performance rope, and that goes back to that whole center ring and all the puns that it plays off of, um, and I think that, like, I don't know, you probably may know this better than me, but I feel that the more like performance or dynamic rope is something that is more modern when it comes to bondage. Like the last
Yeah,
10
I mean,
years.
I talked to again. I reference Lou Rubens quite a bit, and he was very formative, creative guy. Pioneer pre super internet age. Um, and I think you're right. It seems like a lot of that stuff. If you go back just 50, 60, 70 years to Catan Club and Bazaar magazine, it wasn't all performance suspension. But if you go back, say 20 years, 25 years, if you did a static suspension, you could fill a room for the demo of a static suspension. And even 2010 or 12, you had a hard time putting a class together for a transition suspension sequence. I mean, if you went to Shibari Con, if you went to somebody's very specific weekend, an intensive weekend, but you had a hard time putting together, let's say 15 couples in the same room that you could say, okay, everybody, please tie a safe three rope TK, hip harness of your choice, put your partner up sideways. That was like 3 or 4 hours of instruction, even with people that knew what was going on. And nowadays, you can just simply, I mean, at the bigger events, you could have standing room only and people, mad they didn't get into the class, where you could have 20, 30 couples that could, maybe not perfectly, but could follow along a suspension sequence. And that's happened in the last 15 years.
That kind of spurred a thought that goes back to like the intersection of art and bondage. And for me, one of my big attractions to bondage as an overarching term has always been the objectification. I kinda
Sure.
joke, I'm like, I feel like I'm Bob Ross, and my
Yeah,
bottom is my canvas and my rope or my tools or my paintbrushes.
sure. And I go along the same lines of that with lighting. Um, you look at, again, exposure, exhibitionism, the vulnerability of it. That's, I think, where there's a great intersection between East and West, um, where the objectification, humiliation, even of it, can be the point of it, and that's great. And when you start talk about photography and art side of it, you can think of the same photograph lit two different ways, and it's two completely different meanings. You know, you get a clown and you light it super bright, high key, like an iPhone commercial. It's a children's birthday party. And you light it super low key, dark background with hard, edgy shadows, and it's a Stephen King movie. And it's the same clown. One light didn't fire, and it changed the whole thing. So a lot of times, when I talk to folks I've never worked with before, hey, what are we shooting? You know, I do a photo room at an event or something, and I'll say, hey, what are we shooting? And they start telling me about the TK. I don't need to know what you're tying. Give me the position. Is it angry? Is it soft and loving? Is it dark and stormy? Is it mysterious? Paint a picture for me, and then let me paint that with light. Oh, that's a horrible overused phrase, but let me light it to give you that feel you're after.
That's really interesting that you put it that way because something I've said in the past is that rope, I look at it that it can be like good comparison is like the different genres of movies. Are we going
Mhm.
for a horror movie? Are we going for a comedy? Are we going for suspense,
Absolutely.
thriller? Right? And I guess I never really, as someone that is just recently over the last couple of years admitted that I'm a photographer, I've never thought about thinking from that side. Like, what is the goal of my picture? Not just the suspension and the emotions or the feelings that I'm trying to promote there in the bottom, but what type of
Yeah.
emotions or feelings am I trying to capture in the picture?
And that's the difference that I see between somebody that takes the photography side seriously and somebody that just grabs a cell phone picture. Um, and don't get me wrong, there are people like Connor that are amazing and could make a coffee table book out of cell phone pictures. But with most folks, what I mean is just that crappy, flat refrigerator available light that your cell phone always seems to find. Um, if you're just capturing, if it's like a selfie where you're just capturing, hey, we were here, thumbs up, cool moment, that's great. But if you can tell me what you're feeling or what you want to feel in that scene, and I can make it look like that to anybody else that opens their phone and looks at that picture, that's a big accomplishment. I get a buzz off of that. You know, because the bottom, if the bottom in you're doing a cool exposure or a contortion or whatever you're doing, and you've got them blindfolded or hooded, they're feeling something, and they're not feeling that birthday party refrigerator light. They're feeling some drama, they're feeling some anxiety, some maybe some anger, some pain, and if you can put that in there so that anybody seeing that photo can see that you painted the picture and took them on that ride as well, that's kind of an accomplishment.
I agree. And I think it's always interesting to put them through that ride and then show them the picture because I mean that's
Yes, absolutely.
something that a lot of bottoms don't see. They don't have an idea really how they look from our perspective as rope tops.
Sure. And that's another part of it, is much like rope, I use this analogy a lot, much like rope, learn to be nice first. Being mean is easy. Learn to be nice first with your lighting, with your angles, with your posing. Um, like you said, a lot of bottoms don't feel beautiful, or you know, they have either body dysmorphia, or they don't look like He-Man, and they wish they had an eight pack or whatever. Um, a lot of that, you know, you can give somebody confidence and give them um, a big a big boost just by good lighting, posing. Um, you know, and there's a responsibility there. As I see such harsh, angry light and bad posing, and that person's not coming back. Um, if you made them feel worse than they already felt. I mean, granted, maybe they want to be destroyed in a dumpster on fire and they want that look. That's great, but that's easy. learning to be flattering and soft with your rope or your light is a skill and requires more skill. So I lean that direction. And we're quick shout out to the event we're going to next month. We have that indie rope event. I hope you're going to come see us. And we're doing a photo room there, and that's a lot of what we focus on is first, you know, learn those flattering things. Learn the things that are natural and easy. And it's as simple as which way you turn your head or which side you put the light on. It really is, and people don't realize that. So we try to make it nice and simple so everybody can get a little nicer picture. Um, and then they're taking home those souvenirs that are more what they felt, and that's kind of what I'm after.
Well, I I agree. Like, um, lighting is critical as well as body positioning, right? Like you just said,
Absolutely.
turn your neck this way, point your toes, keep your
Yeah.
hands together or your eyes closed or so forth. Um, we do have a question in chat. It says,
What you got?
"Do you ever use sound or scent in artistic scenes?"
Hmm. Um, as far as mood music, that's a great idea. Um, I've used white noise as a distraction. You have bottoms that can't get out of their own head, that are too much that engineering mind and are always thinking about, "Oh, geez, the thermostat set at 74, and I should have set it 73 because I'm gonna be hot, and I didn't set it." And you need something to sort of drown out that noise in their head. White noise is great. Familiar songs are nice, but they can get tied up in that too much. Um, since I used to, um, kinda trick of the trade way back 10, 15 years ago. I think I did it once with cinnamon and once with lavender as far as a scent on the, uh, rope toys bag kind of a thing. So every time that came out, it smelled like cinnamon or lavender or whatever it was, and was a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of a preheat.
That's interesting that um you would do that. There's a lot of people that are really triggered by scents. I mean, if we go into
Sure,
like
absolutely, which is
biology,
why
we
I
talk
would.
about pheromones.
Yeah, yeah, that's something I wouldn't venture into unless you knew, uh, your partner really digs whatever, cinnamon. But yeah, and sound can also be fun if you're playing a mindfuck scene. Um, yeah, that could be a whole lot of fun with somebody blindfolded, messing around with sounds.
I I won't divulge too much information, but when that very annoying shark doo doo song came out,
Right?
I may or may not have tortured somebody with that song and a
Exactly.
little bit of bondage. But they probably
Excellent,
deserved it and asked for it. So
right?
Um, so I think the last question that I personally have is, what are some ideas for doing hidden bondage where your sub is able to be out in public but still be bound? Like, for instance, something under
Interesting.
clothes that wouldn't be drawing of attention from the outside.
Sure, I don't have a huge amount of experience with that. I mean, obviously, things like, I think they call them karatas or bodysuits or crotch rope, things like that. Um, I actually did one, it's not really a rope thing, it was more of a DSC bondagey thing. I did a spreader bar out of a straw, and it was just as simple that sitting at dinner, she had to keep her knees wide enough apart to hold the straw there and wasn't allowed to drop it. So, other than that, good grief, I'm not sure how could you other areas for bondage, I mean, a collar, obviously. You've seen the turtleneck and gag routine, I'm sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss on that one. That might bear some experimentation, exploration.
Well, it sounds like we need to do it for science.
Oh, absolutely.
I at first when you said Using a straw as a spreader bar, I couldn't wrap my head around it, but then after you
Right?
elaborated a little bit more, I was like, "Okay, I think I have some straws in the house, and I
Right?
know what
It's
I'm
not
doing."
that bad an idea. Yeah. Now, one of the funny side effects, and that's been good grief, that's been 15 years or more. Um, but one of the funny side effects of it, um, twofold. One was that it made a little teeny tiny bruise that she could find for several days on the inside of her knees, and she friggin' loved it.
Interesting.
Um, the other funny little detail was we were out at dinner at a nice restaurant, and the girl that was waiting on us saw it and started to tell the other servers about it, and pretty soon and it became sort of an embarrassment, um, kind of an exposure, embarrassment, a little bit of humiliation, all the thing, and she loved it. The girl that I was with doing that, absolutely she was mortified, but she totally got off on it. That people in the restaurant that the wait staff in the restaurant, you could see people kinda moving around to angle to get a look to see if the other person had been telling the truth, that there was actually the girl. Why is that girl holding a straw with her? What is that? So weird. But yeah, it was fun.
Well, and I think something like that is subtle enough, even though it can be seen, it doesn't really cause too much concern or question general public.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
Little
since we're
curiosity.
touching on that, I'm not really into, uh, horrifying the vanillas just because we can, you know? We have this big consent culture now, and we're super into, consent is not just lack of a no, but it's a screaming affirmative yes, yes, please. Um, the public did not consent to our bullshit, and so I don't know. It's really not my cup of tea to go and try and shock the vanillas with everything we can all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really important to, consent and outside public didn't necessarily agree to our shenanigans. We shouldn't involve them.
Yep.
We don't want to scare them, not yet at least. So I think that's about all I have. Is there anything that
All
you
right.
think that maybe we missed or anything that you'd like to bring up?
Um, Good grief, I don't know. I get We kind of covered it. There's a sort of naturally adversarial nature that seems to happen between Shibari and not Shibari, and I love to dispel that. Um, like I said, JD and Dave are two of the best Shibari guys I know, and I count them among my very best friends, and we sit around and trade ideas. I think there's a definite convergent nature to what we're doing. We are using cordage to tie the human body. We're going to come up with some very similar solutions to it. And there is nothing new under the sun. You didn't invent that. Whatever it is you think you invented, somebody did it before. Um, I mean, there's pre-Columbian art of a hog tie. There's art in the sarcophagus in Egypt of somebody tied certain ways. So none of this is brand new. You don't need to hang your name on stuff. Just get out and have fun and be safe and tie, and don't worry about all of the whatever. There's too much drama.
I think that is really important. Don't get lost in the language.
Yeah,
And I think I even found myself getting guilty of that because I am somewhat of a purist and oh I'm not a Shibari person. I practice Kinbaku. And well,
sure.
most people don't even really know what the difference is. Um and I think that as like we move forward in society and as our culture and community gets more accepted, I think that's where new language starts to come about. And I think one of the terms that I've been seeing specifically to Shibari is like rope art or rope artist instead of,
Sure.
rigger or nawashi.
Yeah. And that's, we're circling back to there's nothing under the sun. I may have in my own little lab come up with a solution. I have no illusion that I'm the first one that ever came up with that solution. And if you have a better solution tomorrow, if I hang my name on my solution, I have to defend it even when it's not that good or even when it's dangerous. I have to defend it, which is why you'll never see my name. This is not the knothead harness or the knothead whatever, because I have zero allegiance to the stuff I use. As soon as I see a better solution, I move to it and never look back. Like I've continued. I use a very very basic little set of Legos. I call them. Just, I I have a single limb, a double limb, an adjustable knot, a couple ways to finish. The rest of it's just creativity and execution. If you show me something better tomorrow, it goes in the kit and something else goes in the trash.
I'm very much the same way. And going back to like the art and like what people see versus what is actually there, just like you said, I got a toolbox. I got a really good
Mhm.
TK in my opinion, but as soon as you tell me a better way, I'm gonna change it, right? I got
Yep.
a couple other good ties that I utilize, and then ultimately I kind of let the bottom and the mood dictate the position, very fluid for me at this point
Hell
because
yeah.
don't need to think about the ties. You're familiar with the 4 levels of competency. I when it
Sure.
comes to my ties, it's unconscious competence. I don't need to think about it. So I can reserve
Yeah.
my um brain capacity for dynamics of it and seeing like, oh well, just going back to the Bob Ross, all right, like here's a bird and oh here's a tree. Um
Yeah. You're
think
not worried about
that
selecting a 3/4 inch brush and this amount of paint and that weight. You just paint a bird.
exactly. Exactly. I think that a big thing that we could probably all take from this, the simplicity of what we do, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be overcomplicated. Like you said, if your end game is to get to suspension, learn how to do a single column with the Somerville Bolin,
Yeah,
throw it
you're
on
done.
4
That
limbs,
that's good enough.
and
Yeah. Yep.
there you go. Now, and
Yep.
even with that,
Absolutely.
mastering that single column, you can actually get pretty dynamic and you can get pretty diverse with what you do.
Sure. Yep. I and that there is a combination of I was going to use the word gatekeepy because if you know people are only there to learn the suspension, you hold off showing them the suspension, hoping that they'll learn a little bit more. But there's also um, people want to think that what they're doing is special and exotic, and I'm doing it better than the next guy because I'm special and exotic. Um, sometimes I think that hinders people learning because you end up with folks that can copy a pattern by rote because they tied it 10 times in class, and then you'll ask that same person for a free form position and they just can't do it because they haven't been shown that position.
Goes back to when I evolved or desired to evolve to a performance rigger, and that's kind of the epiphany that I had that I only learned patterns and I didn't understand the fundamentals behind that pattern.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep. In fact, going back a few years, maybe close to 10 years, some folks that were um, legitimately national level presenter. And this is about the time I transitioned to be more of a photographer. And I would describe the position and they'd look at me blank. They wanted to be told, tie this TK, lift from here. No, no, just put this person up, front lift, I don't care what harness it is, they're gonna lean back like they're in a recliner, lift them off the ground. And it was too generalized, and they didn't have the pieces to just free form that.
I think that goes back into like one of your previous statements is like so focused on that one specific goal that they
Sure.
miss the journey getting to that goal.
Yep. And, um, I've always been kind of a simplicity and commonality nut. So, for a while, for instance, I had stuff that I would use with jute. I had 5 kits of jute. People think I'm anti-jute. I had 5 kits of jute, and I had stuff that worked with jute. A sliding sheet bend was something that I used. And then when I, for instance, found the Pheromond, I ditched the sliding sheet bend because the Pheromone worked with any material. So I could learn one thing and I could do it well and apply it a million different ways. So again, it's a quote that you hear applied to a bunch of different sports and hobbies and activities, but it's something to the effect of there are no advanced techniques, just advanced applications. So it goes again back to that creativity and execution. Um, just as simple as good tension. That and that's not a Western or Eastern or Shibari or Kinbaku thing. If you can tie the pattern, but your tension is shit, you can mummify that bottom and rope, and they're never going to be comfortable. But if you tie a 4 wrap Somerville bowline or a single limb around their waist, you can lift almost anybody off the ground comfortably with it, just if you get good tension. So it can be that simple, just really well done.
And I think that's a lot of we get when we first get into new activity going back to that frenzy, right? We don't think
Yep,
about how important that building block of tension is. We're just so focused on, like thinking about Legos, building that big Lego castle. We don't think about the
sure,
smallest piece that goes into building that castle. And when it comes to rope, I would speculate that one of the smallest foundational pieces of rope is tension. Without good tension, it doesn't matter what you do.
yeah, absolutely foundational or fundamental in the sense that it is a foundation.
Well, I think all I have, I'm sitting here going over my notes, and I think most of them are just personal at this point.
Okay.
Um,
Well, we have a bunch of photos we sent back and forth, and people, I don't know what they're asking in the chat. I can't see the chat, so it's up to you, sir.
yeah, no, there's been a lot of conversation, not a whole lot of questions, but it definitely uh, well received. Um,
Good.
and I think a lot of people were interested in hearing about the frenzy, how it affects not only bottoms but tops.
Yeah. Yeah. If you come in with a skill, let's say you've been watching YouTube videos and whatever, you're good at cracking a bullwhip, or probably even more realistically, you're let's just assume that's a level. You're a presenter level top at XYZ, and you change location, you move to Atlanta, you're gonna be the new shiny toy for a minute,
Yep.
and you
Yep.
could go right back into frenzy of, "Oh, look, I can do all these things with all these people."
Well, I felt that actually. I think it was just last weekend. I haven't been out to a public space in about a year, and finally had the time opportunity to go out to a public space, actually to subspace in Indianapolis, and you got up on the stage a little bit, and I forgot how good that felt. But afterwards, even though I've performed at this space before and I frequented this space just as a guest, I hadn't been there for a while. So there was new people there that haven't seen me or weren't familiar.
Sure.
And it was back to that same thing. Like now I'm a new shiny toy, and I'm like,
Yep.
okay, maybe I should just go out to the dungeon like once a year to get that
Yeah.
really good dopamine hit.
I used to, I used to do, like, microwave scenes. I would have things that I could do, um, I tie pretty quickly and I tie real simply, so it's not a super skill, it's just that I only need just this 10-footer and then up to the ring and we do this thing. So, I would people would change under the main ring, like, at the hour, and that was kinda their time was get on their rig, do your thing, pull them down, aftercare, and move off by 8:55 so the 9 o'clock guy can get on. And I would go find who was next and say, "Are you next? It looks like they're coming down a little early." And he'd say, "Yeah." And I'd say, "Can I have 10 minutes?" And I mean 10 minutes from the time I walk on until we clear. He said, "What the hell are you gonna do?" And I said, "It's gonna be funny. Watch this." He said, "Well, hell yeah, I gotta see what the hell you do in 10 minutes. Nobody can do anything in 10 minutes." And people would see the scene come down and they'd step out and get a soda, and I would do like a real simple tie, immediately make it a predicament, and go right into whip tickle. And if you're not familiar, you don't let them warm up, you don't let the endorphins flow, and you just go 1,000 miles an hour and you make them ask for the next one in order to stop the first one. And you just go back and forth until they red. And then you give them some ridiculous safe word, for instance, and it gets the crowd involved and they're cheering. And they, I did this with actually, she was a national level shibari presenter, and I tied her in nylon, and she turned her nose up at it. We did whip tickle, and I said her safe word was she had to say that I was the shibari master, and she didn't wanna do that, and she resisted, and she finally did, and I threw my hands up like a touchdown, untied her, carried her off. People came back in the dungeon going, "What the hell's the ruckus? I stepped out to get a Coke." "Oh, Knothead did a thing." "Knothead never scenes. What do you mean Knothead did a thing?" "Oh, he did a thing last year too, I think, but that's it." And that I was kinda known for that. If you stepped out for a soda and I was doing something, you missed it because I didn't wanna be there all day. I didn't wanna be in the main ring. She had her dopamine hit. I got to get on and get off and amaze everybody that a 10-minute scene could happen.
That's amazing. I love it. Imma have to I might have to borrow that one.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Sounds like it. I think, like, going back to, like, some of our conversations, like, how simple it can be. Like you said, in
Mhm.
10 minutes, it sounds like you guys had a wonderful scene for both of you.
Yeah, we do things like and some of it was prep, like, I would take a big salad bowl and fill it full of water and freeze it, and then I'd lift her up to where she was balancing on her toes on this ice dome. So the only support she had was either hang by her wrists uncomfortably or stand on an ice dome with her frozen bare feet and go into whip tickle on that, and the whole place is just shaking their head like, What in the hell are we even watching?" And then it was over before they could figure it out. But it was fun, and it was something different, and that's
Um,
kinda what I hope to bring to Bondage is fun and something different.
I love the fun that I see in pictures, and honestly, the ice dome, once again, that is something I never would have thought of. Adds a lot of depth to suspension. Um, I added it to my notes. So, bottoms
Yeah, I'll,
beware.
uh, I'll I'll send you a video of it, or I'll send you a link to the video. There's a video of it. In fact, it might even be my oldest video from about 10 years ago, Drea Morgan. We did a predicament night. I'm kind of a, organizer, event guy, and kind of a PT Barnum, so I set this predicament night up, and we treated it almost like a midway where, um, I would say, "Hey, Dustin, what do you got?" And you would take your 5 minutes and show us your tie, your predicament, and then there would be a quick Q&A of, "Hey, how did you tie that?" Or they'd ask the bottom, "Hey, what were you feeling?" And then we go to the next one. And so we might do 20 predicaments in an evening. And I was so busy running it, I didn't get to do my new predicament idea, which was this ice dome. And so after the fact, Lou and Drea said, "Weren't you gonna do something?" And I said, "No, no, no, we didn't have time for it." Well, Drea wants to see it. I told her all about it. And so there's a video of Drea Morgan doing the ice dome. First time.
Be interested in seeing it. Actually, that makes me think of something. Oh man, we just can't get off the phone, but that's all right. This is all gold in my opinion. But some time ago, um, I 3D printed it was an ice lock, and essentially it took
Oh,
a 1-inch ice cube, right? It was 2 pieces of plastic, and I planned to print it or, machine it, I just never got to it, and the they slid together like fingers, the ice cube went into the fingers, so until the ice cube melted, it wouldn't come apart.
yeah, very cool.
It was a lot of fun, and about 52 minutes at room temperature for a 1-inch ice cube to melt.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, there's again, you talk about art and bondage since you touched on it. I get a lot of inspiration from cartoons and paintings and drawings. And there's an Andy's Dames, I think it is, um, has some wonderful stuff. And his current photo is a girl in a self bondage predicament where she has the key frozen in ice. And Dan Laura is a black and white, mostly black and white ink artist that does a lot of really cool self bondage stuff like that, like the concepts that he draws. Very cool stuff. Okay, so you now have a link in your email. You have a link to that video. I look forward to hearing what you think.
I look forward to watching it.
Yeah,
I have you know, I didn't think that I was gonna get news ideas from this discussion, but
you
to
never
say
know.
that I'm not surprised because I think I've gotten scene ideas from almost every one of our discussions since we've met, so
Oh, absolutely. I'm the same way, and uh I will go to anybody's class, especially predicaments, because I love to steal ideas and put my own twist on them. And literally just from watching people put their rope away, I learn something every time I watch somebody tie.
that is important. I mean, to constantly learn, and you can learn from anybody, like you said, as simple as, like, putting your rope up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. If you know, again, you can relate it to a bunch of different hobbies or skills or jobs. Um, man, if you think you know it all, you're dangerous. There's
Absolutely.
a lot of bad stuff happens when you think you don't have anything left to learn.
Oh, and we've both been tying for a handful of years. Just in those handful of years, the evolution of what we do and what is considered more commonplace now isn't. I mean, when I first started doing suspension, we didn't have posh, didn't have reinforced jute or hemp X or
Yeah,
anything like that. I used the same jute that I tied the body with that I did suspension with.
yeah,
Now we have
and I
X.
grew up I started with, like everybody else maybe, I got on the interwebs, and the interwebs said the only cool thing was, to do your own hemp, so I did my own, um, and it was terrible, it was trash, it was probably dangerous, and everybody constantly told me, "No, you can't do that with nylon. No, you'll never be able to suspend with nylon," and go through Lou Rubin stuff. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the guy's done every position you can think of and a bunch you can't in nylon, and then among my favorite things as a little sidetrack, I showed up for a predicament demo, and it was maybe the only time I ever did a predicament demo on a bottom that I didn't know, and we start talking and going through safety and all this sort of thing in front of the group, and I dropped the rope bag, and a nylon couple of hanks of nylon fell out of it, and she made a pouty face. I said, "Oh, what's wrong?" "Well, you just you can't be mean enough with nylon."
Hmm.
"Oh,
We learned a
darling,
lesson
don't
that night.
you worry." Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, and, I like I said, I used to have 5 kits of jute, and the overly simplified Western leaning style I tie, I found I tie faster, smoother, cleaner, tighter with nylon. It doesn't wear out, I can machine wash it, and it's 5 or 6 times stronger. Um, I will get bored with the color before I wear a set of nylon out.
I think it's like a big to think about here is understanding the tech word would be the material data science behind what you're using, but
Sure.
understand the material you're using and the properties of. I mean, like you said, I based off of my recollection, you probably know. I think nylon working strength for 6 millimeter nylon is somewhere just north of a
Yeah.
thousand pounds,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I get people
Where the
all the time that say, "I've been told that it's just not safe." Well, if you
five
don't
times
tie
the strength that
knots.
you.
Yeah, and I have never seen a nylon rope fail, but I've seen several jute uplines explode.
Yeah, I they fail
And
differently.
sure.
I think the this is way tangent. Maybe this should be a personal conversation at some point. But just I think that like the synthetics, they fail from friction, right? And from the heat of the friction. Whereas like you said, like jute, when it's done, it just disintegrates.
Well, um, I had a funny, speaking, rope nerds, everybody knows more than the next guy, and everybody wants to sharpshoot the next guy, and everybody wants to tell you what you did wrong in your photo. I had a guy telling me that, "Yeah, that was a decent photo, but you really should have shot f11. Everything would be in focus." I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I was after, dickhead." Um, but I put somebody up in the puppet suspension. I don't think I have any photos of the puppet suspension up. Bodacious Binks does a hell of a job on it, and I should get some puppet pictures up. Cool suspension. Um, Depending on how you count, 6 or 7 lift points. So one of the more comfortable things you could put somebody up in, and they can move around and adjust their own position. So somebody blew my picture up and blew my picture up until they could see that I attached one of the lines with a lark's head. And they were absolutely horrified and wanted to pillory me because that turns 2 ropes into 1, and it was only 1 strand of rope that was supporting that portion. And again, if you do the math, let's call it 1,000 pounds, and we have 7 lift points, so 14 strands of nylon. And okay, I'll give you that one of them's a lark's head, so let's count that only as 13 strands. That girl's gonna be red Jello pudding sprayed on the wall before I ever get those ropes to fail. You could not centrifuge her in the atom collider. I mean, it just yeah, we are nowhere near the, material limits of what we're playing with. And as
Or
long as
even
as long as you're aware of the danger and your use life of even unreinforced jute, plenty of safety there, 3 or 4 times up and down and more than 1 lift point, I don't think there's an issue.
I know, I mean, depending on jute has a little bit more of a range, due to it being a natural fiber, but most of the
Sure.
data that I've seen is about 150 pounds to 220 pounds,
Yeah,
per
but that's
strand.
also when it's new and before it's conditioned, and
Absolutely.
it loses its strength, and you just have to respect it. Just don't, lean on it dramatically and yank people up into the air with a full 180 bend over a hard ring. You're shortening your lifespan there.
Alright, well, before we go off on another tangent, this has
Yeah.
just been wonderful, and all these other little side tangents I
Yeah, I've
think
had a
are definitely
blast.
worth going on to. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the stream, say bye
Sure.
before I stop the stream, and then I'll keep you on for
Alright.
just a second to say
Good night,
bye.
folks. Thanks for coming. Drive safe.
Just remember, this is Knothead from Knothead Nylon. Um, thank you for being here.
Had a blast. Anytime.